All right, so the question, which stance should you use? Which stance should you use for martial arts or for self-defense? Um, the first thing to say is that when I talk about stance, the word's a little deceiving. I'm not talking about a static position. I'm talking about it. Think of it as like in an old motion picture, like a little still frame of the motion. So it's a brief moment in time of shifting the weight, which is your stance. So stances are mobile, they're not static. But we'll use the word stance just so we can understand it, and that's the commonly used term. Um, so stances are used to basically for a couple reasons. They're used to shift weight. So when you shift the weight forward, you put power into your technique. When you shift the weight backward, you can defend pulls or you can move away from attacks. And when you sink the weight downward, if your stance sinks the weight downward, you can resist techniques or you can ground yourself for the strike. So a stance does those things. Now, the purpose of the stance depends on what you're using it for, what the sport is, or what the what you're using it for, or which sport and what the rules are. So, for example, in boxing, there are different boxing stances. There are several different boxing stances, but typically the stance is a little bit higher, and the waist is very flexible, so you can have a lot of head movement to move away from strikes. And you don't need to worry about takedowns to your legs. You don't need to worry about leg kicks. You don't need to worry about sweeps to the legs because all of that's illegal and not against the rule, or it's against the rules. So the stance can be higher because you don't have to worry about things like that. So, that's one example. If you look at wrestling, the wrestling stance is very low because you want to, defend against like double legs, single legs, and things like that. So you need to have low so you can get underhooks and defend and sprawl. In judo, it's a little higher because they do more, and Greco-Roman wrestling, they do more high throws and clinching type things. In MMA, the stance is typically, there are many MMA stances in many ways people stand and move, but typically the stance is a little more mobile. It's a little bit higher often, and the guard is a little bit wider because the gloves are smaller, so that you need to have those, the movement, because you're not going to block as much. You don't have the bigger gloves like you might have in boxing or something like that. So in Muay Thai, the stance is higher. The stance is typically higher and the legs are light, and there's this marching motion because typically we want to check the leg kicks. That's one thing you can do. So when the roundhouse kick comes, you can check it with your shin. And you're still mobile, and you can use that rocking back motion to put power into your strike also. Then there's the whole idea of being a southpaw or orthodox fighter. So an orthodox fighter fights with the left lead, and a southpaw fights with the right lead. Now, typically, the method is to fight with your power hand in back. So mostly in boxing and MMA and things like that, people do that. They set up the motions with their lead hand, and then they can, use the power hand for the knockout strike, along with other things like lead hooks and things like that. But there are systems such as 7-Star Mantis, which are typically right lead systems, and there are other systems, kung fu systems like Xingyi, which are, I guess you could say, is primarily a left lead system. And some of the kung fu systems and some of the old systems, they fought with a right lead because their weapon or their sword was on their left side. So when they fought, especially with weapons, they wanted to defend the sword so no one could take it, which was on their left side. Going into modern times, police officers and that, often if you're right-handed, you keep your left hand out and you stop the person with your hand as you protect your gun on your right side. So that's the reason you're protecting your weapon and keeping that side back. Yeah, and like I said, in Xingyi, it's based on the spear. So a lot of times you use your back hand and strike with your front, and thrust the spear through that front hand. So you're using the power hand and back to direct energy into the spear. And some philosophies, there's a couple boxers that have done this, and in Mantis style, often the strong dominant hand is in front, so you can get more power and other reasons also. So it just kind of depends on the method that it comes from. Now, there is, in karate and kung fu, there are many reasons for stances, like in a bow stance or zenkutsudachi in a Japanese karate, like you're throwing the weight forward for the strike. In cat stances, you're moving away from the strike, and then the lead foot's light to protect against inside leg kicks, groin kicks, and also, since the leg's light, you can defend with a kick, a lot like they do in Muay Thai with a teep. Keep that front leg light and throw that teep, that front kick. Like I said earlier, horse stances generally sink the weight down and things like that. So for self-defense, my personal philosophy, and there are others out there, but is to keep a left lead in general if you're right-handed, because you can use your right hand to stop someone. The hand out here is a stop symbol. It's not aggressive. It looks like you don't want to fight, but it's a blocker. If they come at you, you can stop them with the left hand, and you have your right hand to strike if you need to, or whatever, to add power to the strike, since it's on the back side and you can twist your body more. You want to be mobile in self-defense, so you don't want your stance extremely low, but you want it low enough to have a base and to be solid. But you want to be able to move and get out of there if it's a self-defense situation. You don't want it to get into a fight. Like my one instructor says, your insurance policy goes up with every second that you're in that situation. So you want to get out of there as quick as possible. And like I said, for self-defense, you want the left lead if you're right-handed, because you may have a self-defense weapon that you can use, like a knife or whatever, but you can hold it. You can pull it out on your right side. So the strong side's back. Now, for self-defense, if someone has a blunt weapon, like some sort of club or something like that, or a knife, and I have access to one, they break into your house and you have access to one, whatever, then I typically put the dominant side in front. Because if they got something to strike away at me or cut with, I don't want my empty hand out there where they can cut it. I want my weapon hand in front so I can defend, and we're kind of in an equal position, and hopefully I have more skill, so I have the advantage. But also another comment that I hadn't really thought about, but a lot of point fighters and people, there are some people that do MMA that fight like this too. They fight more in a sideways stance, more in like a fencing stance. A lot of Taekwondo now, that the modern Taekwondo, Olympic Taekwondo, do this also, and there's a lot of that foot fencing. That front foot, that lead foot is like, keeping people away, pumping those kicks and things like that. So it's hard to get around that lead foot, and it's hard for them to land punches if you're a good kicker in general, not against some of the good people, but so some people use that stance because as soon as they get the point, the match is stopped, and you can just you can stop the fight like that. And again, these are all generalizations, so I'm just giving you some ideas to think about. So which stance should you use? I don't know, take all those things into mind. Take into mind the purpose of the stance and what you're going to do. And remember, you don't have to pick one. You can adapt, you can change, and you should, depending on if it's working or not and what suits you and at your level. So hopefully this was helpful. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll keep the videos coming. Thanks.